Let me ask you, which of the commandments of God do you find is the most difficult for you to obey? Now, maybe you would say the commandment, do not lie, is the most difficult because when you're in a tight spot, you want to kind of twist the truth just a little bit, and it seems harmless, right? Or maybe you say the one that's most difficult is to not covet. Because in a materialistic society like we are in, it becomes so difficult. I mean, if someone gets richer or they achieve a status that maybe you want for yourself, it's hard not to be jealous of them. Maybe you'll say that the commandment that is the hardest for you is not to lust. Because living in this sensual society, it is hard not to lust. Or maybe it's Paul's commandment, do all things without grumbling. Maybe you thought that grumbling was your spiritual gift. So there's no way you could obey that commandment, right? Indeed, there are many difficult commandments. But I think one of the hardest to obey is the one that we read this morning. Do not let your hearts be troubled. There's so much to be troubled about in this world. There's the threat of war and terrorist attacks, political corruption, crime, violence, economic pressure. If you weren't feeling troubled before, you might be now. On top of these various national and international troubles, there are all those what-if scenarios. What if I get cancer? What if I'm in an accident? What if my spouse leaves me? What if one of my children gets sick and possibly even dies? What if I lose my job? What if I lose my friends? I'm rejected at school. All this and more can bring us real heart trouble. That's why some pundits have said that we live in the cardiac age. Everyone seems to have some kind of heart trouble of one kind or another. Now, maybe your heart trouble is not based on national or international concerns or those what-if scenarios. Maybe they're more intensely personal. Maybe you're a single mother, wondering how to be a good parent and provider. You may be a parent or grandparent agonizing over the rebellion of your children and or your grandchildren. Maybe you're barely making ends meet and feeling overwhelmed with your financial obligations, or you have chronic health problems and you're weighing the myriad options for treatment. Maybe on this Mother's Day, you're wondering how much longer you'll have your mother around. Or in my case, with my mom already gone, will I see my mother again when I get to the other side? And you need a bridge over those troubled waters. Well, let me tell you, if your heart is troubled, if you're feeling confused, if you're feeling concerned, overwhelmed, well, you're in good company. In the Gospel of John, chapter 14 that we just read, the disciples felt the very same way. The ripe young age of 33, their Lord, who they'd been with for 3 years, is now leaving them. Disciples weren't expecting this, even though Jesus had told them multiple times. They were counting on Jesus being around for a long, long time. They were anticipating Jesus to set them free from Roman occupation and oppression, and they were preparing to reign and rule with him. Now, it finally begins to dawn on them that Jesus really is going to die, and their hearts are heavy and deeply troubled. Well, fortunately, in our passage, Jesus addresses his disciples' heart trouble with some real heart-to-heart words, where he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Now, we need to note the reason we should not be troubled. It's not because Jesus is going to magically make all the bad, all the no good, horrible circumstances of our lives go away. I mean, we read that He is still going to be arrested, tortured, and ultimately executed. Rather, we're not to be afraid because these circumstances are not the end of the story. I really love the way this passage presents the very human, natural fears and questions of the disciples. And yet, in a few words, Jesus paints a wonderful word picture of the life to come. He says, "My Father's house, many rooms, a prepared place, a prepared way to get there, a trusted guide, not being left alone to find our own way." And ending with being with Jesus again. You see, Jesus addresses His followers then as He addresses each and every one of us now with the words of assurance. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You see, Jesus indeed is our bridge over troubled water, and we can take that to the bank. Yet comfort isn't the only feeling that's prompted by this passage, is it? There are other words in this text that may make us a little uneasy. You see, according to John, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." I think John 14:6, the one we just read, is perhaps the most misunderstood and misused of all the so-called clobber verses. Now, a clobber verse is a verse that someone uses to convince a non-believer to believe, or else. See, this verse, John 14:6, is seen on bumper stickers and church signboards and even appears at sporting events. I mean, after quoting this verse, what else is there to say? How could any non-Christian argue against "I am the truth, the way, the life, no one comes to the Father except through me"? Unfortunately, many people believe that these words really should be understood in the very narrow sense to declare that only Christians will be welcomed into God's kingdom. Everyone else? Sorry, no dice. Your ship sailed and you weren't on it. But is that really what Jesus meant? Unfortunately, such thinking has sparked the bloodletting of the Crusades and helped pave the road to the Holocaust. Numerous Christians have latched on to these words to justify their intolerance of other faiths. I know most of you read about this. This was a number of years ago, about that pastor in that tiny fundamentalist church in Florida who made good on his promise to burn the Koran. A YouTube video of the burning quickly made its way to Afghanistan, touching off violent protests. More than 20 people, including 7 United Nations workers, were murdered in the mayhem. I can't even begin to believe that Jesus, who constantly emphasized the centrality of love and forgiveness, would want His teachings to be used to provoke violence. Still, many people of faith, especially Christians, Jews, and Muslims, are prone to believe that their religion is the only true one. Muslim fundamentalists justify terrorism. Christian fundamentalists have called on the U.S. government to declare war on Muslims. Orthodox Jews declare that the only chosen people are they. And so we close our borders and we forbid others to be a part of this great nation. Too often people of faith boast, hey, God is on our side. Only people who believe as we do are right. You ever wonder how many people today keep their distance from religion because they think it requires them to be intolerant of other faiths and beliefs and to have contempt for those who don't believe the way they do? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I believe without a doubt that Christ is the best revelation of God and the way for me. But I also try to remember that it is very easy to slip into the mindset that God acts in ways that are especially beneficial to me. You may have heard the story about the guide who is giving a tour of heaven to someone who had just gotten there. Guide takes the newcomer past a number of different rooms where people are having the time of their lives. The guide points to the room where the Baptists are having fun because for once in their life they're dancing. Points to a room where the Methodists are enjoying, my goodness, a glass of wine. And then he passes a room where the decently and in order Presbyterians are enjoying unaccustomed chaos. They pass room after room. Eventually they approach the last room. And the guide says to the visitor, okay, we have to be quiet now. These are and now you can insert any denomination, intolerant denomination you want. They think they're the only ones here. And of course, that can't be true, can it? But isn't that the way of many people of faith when they picture heaven? It's filled with people who are just like they are. I am so thankful we can worship in a congregation where there are young and old, black and white, rich and poor, African and English, Asian and Hispanic. See, this passage, no one comes to the Father except through me, it sounds exclusive. But there are other passages in the Word where Jesus strikes a very different note. Earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus says that He is the Good Shepherd and His followers are His sheep. And then He adds, but I have other sheep that are not of this fold. The Gospel of Matthew and Mark, we find a story about a Canaanite woman who asked Jesus to heal her daughter. His first response to her is that his ministry is directed only at the people, the Jews. Yet after she begs for help, Jesus indeed heals her daughter and tells the woman that she possesses great faith, despite the fact that she's a Canaanite. And of course, there's Matthew's dramatic scene of the last judgment in which Jesus separates those to be included in God's kingdom against those who will not, the sheep and the goats. And his basis for separating them never mentions what people believe. What he says will make the difference is those who feed the hungry, clothe the naked, care for the ill, and visit those in prison. When we're looking at John's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 6, it is vital that we remember the context of which it is written. See, it's part of Jesus' farewell address to his closest followers. A few hours later, he's going to be snatched away and eventually put to death. You see, he's not conducting a seminar on the legitimacy of other faiths. Nowhere does Jesus actually show any knowledge of Hinduism, and Islam doesn't come around for another 600 years. See, Jesus isn't judging other faith traditions. He's comforting his closest friends and encouraging them to remain faithful to his mission after he's gone. Jesus immerses himself in God. He studied and lived the Jewish scriptures. Jesus is the way. Not in the sense that only those who believe in him will be saved, but in the sense that he is the model that we are to emulate. He shows us a life that is totally committed to God. It's a life filled by God's love, God's wisdom, and God's desire for justice. Like I said, Christ is the way for me. But I don't believe that God is limited to only one way of reaching people. It makes sense that God would provide different paths for people to follow. But that doesn't mean that any path will do, or that they're all the same. Following Christ leads me to respect people of other faiths, but to question the path that promotes injustice or fails to highlight compassion. I found this very interesting. The World Encyclopedia of Religion identifies 10,000 distinct religions in the world, and 150 of those have 1 million followers or more. The claim that Christianity holds sufficient truth for salvation does not mean that it has to hold that truth exclusively. Spiritual leaders like Gandhi, who was a Hindu, and Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Buddhist, have come closer to Jesus' truth, the Jesus way, and the Jesus life than most Christians I know, including myself. As C.S. Lewis, a great Christian theologian, in his book Mere Christianity points out, he says this: "Here's another thing that used to puzzle me. Is it not frightfully unfair that this new life, his Christian life, should be confined to people who have heard of Christ and been able to believe in Him? But the truth is, God has not told us what His arrangements are about the other people." And this is one that just really stuck with me. We do know that no man can be saved except through Christ. We do not know that only those who know Him can be saved through Him. Now let me repeat that, because I had to read it a couple times before it really sunk in. We do know that no man can be saved except through Christ. We do not know that only those who know Him can be saved through Him. Well, that brings me to the last critical verse in today's passage that I want to discuss this morning. One that's often overlooked. It's verse 12. Listen to it again. Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you that the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do. In fact, they will do greater works than these." See, Jesus challenges us to accomplish great things. He challenges us to outdo Him in acts of compassion and works of justice. But obviously that is a huge challenge. One last story. A few years ago, a Baptist minister named Tony Campolo, a great theologian himself, was in Haiti checking on missionary work that he supports. He went to the little Holiday Inn where he stays the day before he boards his plane to go home. And as he stepped out of the taxi to go into the Holiday Inn, he was basically intercepted by 3 young girls. He calls them girls because the oldest, he says, couldn't have been more than 15 years at the time. The one in the middle says, "Hey, mister, for $20, I'll do whatever you want. I'll do it all night long. You know what I mean?" And he knew what she meant. He turned to the next one and he said, What about you? Could I have you for $20? And she said yes, and so did the third girl. The third one tried to mask her contempt for him with a smile, but he said, it's hard to look alluring when you are aged 15 and desperately hungry. So he said to them, "I'm in room 210. Be up there in 10 minutes. I've got $60, and I'm going to pay for all 3 of you to be with me all night long." He rushed up to his room, called down to the front desk, and said he wanted every Walt Disney DVD that they had. And then he called the restaurant and said, do you have banana splits? He says, "I want banana splits with extra ice cream and extra everything. I want huge ones, and I want 4 of them. Well, 10 minutes passed and little girls came up, and the ice cream and the videos, the DVDs came, and they sat up watching DVDs and laughing until about 1 in the morning when the girls fell asleep. As Tony Campolo looked at these 3 young girls stretched out asleep, he thought to himself, nothing has really changed. Tomorrow they'll be back on the streets selling themselves to dirty, filthy men, because there will always be men who for a few bucks will destroy little girls. And he didn't know enough of their language to tell them about Christ. But he said, God's Spirit said to him, for one night, you let those little girls be little girls. Doing great things in the name of Christ. So as I close, let me summarize, probably for the first time I have ever done a 3-point sermon. Let me tell you those 3 points. First, Jesus counsels us not to be troubled, for he has our back and our future with him is secured. Second, we need to know that we're not the only people on this earth that God cares about and loves and has a plan for. And third, Jesus challenges us to be his hands and his feet in this world, and to carry his mission. Jesus challenges us to break into people's lives by loving them as he would, even for only one night. And remember, we can never know the lasting impact of an act of compassion. And so may we, in concert with Jesus, because of Jesus, be God's bridge over troubled waters. And the invitation this morning is to keep your eyes peeled for the next opportunity that comes your way, and give it your best. And then let God take care of the rest. Amen.